Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Rise of Kyoshi chapter analysis video. This one's going to be for chapter 31, which is called The Return. This is the second last chapter of the book, and the last, I suppose, main chapter, because the last chapter is more of a kind of epilogue, a little bit of a setup for the second book and stuff like that. But anyway, there's a lot to go through in this chapter, so let's just jump straight into the detailed action. So, we start off from Jianzhu's perspective, but then kind of cut back to Kyoshi's perspective. Jianzhu sat by Heiran's bedside in the infirmary. She was alive, but she hadn't woken up yet. So Heiran is in a coma, so basically only she and Jianzhu have survived the poisoning. Jianzhu explains that it was, of course, Master Amok's poison resistance training that helped him to survive. On the next page, it's explained that a combination of Heiran's inner fire and her constitution had helped her to survive. And we just get Jianzhu noting that of everything he's done along the way, the people he's killed, the schemes, the ploys, having to hurt Heiran during this final stage of his plan has been the toughest thing, the thing that he didn't want to do of everything. But he notes that, the Western leadership of the Earth Kingdom is gone because of the amount of people he's just killed. It's going to be chaos in certain parts here to, make amends from this. But Jianzhu could come out of this okay because he has taken out all of his enemies, and the people who are still left in the rest of the Earth Kingdom are kind of, for the most part, okay with him, and he feels he can make good even if little bits and pieces of his plan are found out. But now he has to go prepare for the meeting with Kyoshi. Then we cut to basically Lek's funeral, and we just note it's a very quick thing because, of course, as a Daofei, all of them, but especially Lek, wouldn't want a fancy burial, so they bury him in a field outside of Zygon Cemetery, and this is as part of Siwang tradition, but also Daofei tradition, to not really be near the abiders and just have a simple kind of burial. What does it say here? Yeah. The desert folk considered the simple embrace of the land the only honor worthy of the departed, silence the most fitting eulogy. Then the group asked Kyoshi, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish this, I'm going to finish him." "What about us?" Wang said, and this is where she says, "Here's where we have to part ways." Now, this is later revealed to not be her going off on her own and leaving her group behind, but actually sending them off to get Rangi back, because in all of this, Jianzhu has forgotten, or he doesn't know yet, that Kyoshi does actually have a group supporting her. He doesn't know about the Flying Opera Company and that Kyoshi's effectively their leader now. He just thinks there's some weird Daofei connection going on there, and she's potentially been captured but managed to get over here. She's killed Zhu Ping-an. He doesn't know the full story, but he doesn't think that she's developed a sort of support group around her. So he sort of miscalculates there, in that she has to go to the meeting with Jianzhu alone, but she can send the rest of them to where he inevitably will have Rangi captive, which more than likely is his own mansion. So this is where we cut to Kyoshi and her arriving at Qinchao village. So this, of course, Qin village here, and we get a description of this place. And this is interesting because obviously in Avatar Day, that episode, it's a very funny episode. They really make fun of the town. Even the Qin the Conqueror backstory is a bit of a kind of comedic type thing, as much as Kyoshi comes in and says, "Yeah, I killed him. It was an accident, but I actually did kill him," that sort of a thing. All they get across is that this is a weird town, basically. They've got these weird customs, they don't like the Avatar because Kyoshi killed Qin, and they really think Qin is a great guy. This helps to explain sort of their kind of just annoying nature with all their rituals, and why they act this way compared to anywhere else in the Earth Kingdom. So, over half the inhabitants belonged to the clan of Qin, making outsiders feel like they were talking to the same person and being watched by the same set of eyes, no matter what part of the town they did business in. There was a degree of tight-fisted wealth that drew attention away from a set of bizarre customs and holidays that appeared nowhere else in the Earth Kingdom, many of which revolved around dolls and effigies, small ones for the home and great towering ones in the square for public festivals. Qinchao folk were insular even compared to Yokoyans. They exalted their status with borderline treasonous statements like a citizen of Qinchao and a subject of the Earth Kingdom, where wordplay and order implied their priorities. So it just gets across this idea that they consider themselves as being a citizen of Qinchao, the Qin village, first before everything else. They put their clan and their one location above the fact that they're an Earth Kingdom citizen. And that, I think, helps to explain, I suppose, where Qin the Conqueror is going to come from, why he is going to want to take over and stuff like that their way of doing things is better. Now, ultimately, the character directly, Qin himself, hasn't been set up just yet, though I suppose this almost implies, with like prior to Qin himself existing potentially, that I assume it is just some guy who calls himself Qin because they're so devoted to the clan of Qin, rather than that being maybe his actual name. But either way, interesting stuff, just with some world building setup there of their weird kind of customs and so on. So this is when we then, the meeting is going to take place in the Qin clan's crown jewel, which is the great stone tea house in the center of town. It's a 3-story structure entirely made of stone. So a really big fancy tea shop. Kyoshi walks in. She is in full makeup, battle armor, stuff like that. She attracted attention. She attracted attention openly and without hesitation, like she'd never done before in her life. This was who she was now. This was her skin. This was her face. So that is very interesting. She's going into a big battle, and something about that gear gives her this confidence. She's accepted that that's who she is now. So that's very interesting to see her, I suppose specifically kind of off screen almost, put that makeup on, get her team to put it on for her. But anyway, she walks in, everyone's a bit like, whoa, who's this person? Because like obviously she looks like wild basically to anyone who's just going about their day normally. But quickly she just sits down, everything calms down, they stop looking at her. Then Jianzhu walks in, and this is obviously where the chapter begins to kick off, and we see that this confrontation is going differently than you might expect. This is not empty town, 2 earthbenders going at it with everything that they have. It's not a huge fight. This fight takes place differently. It's about the conversation back and forth between each other, and then a different type of struggle. So they both note that they each look terrible. They're both suffering from the after effects of poison. Jianzhu obviously had to poison himself, but then the Shirshu poison that hasn't completely left Kyoshi's system. He tells her that the Shirshu were tracking Rangi and not her. I talked about that back in the Shirshu chapter when revealing that it happened later on. This is where it happens, which is just a nice interesting thing that makes sense because Kyoshi took all of her possessions with her basically, so using a possession from Rangi to get the scent made complete sense. So Kyoshi says, I should have seen this coming. You traffic in hostages. You're no better than a Dao Fei. So he tells her, to come home. He says that Rangi's also at home. And this is where Kyoshi places one of Lek's bullets on the table. This is what she's going to use to take Jianzhu out. Very symbolic that in Kyoshi's mind, Jianzhu took Yun, but then he also just very recently took Lek from her. And she sort of blames herself a little bit for taking her eye off the prize by getting lost a little bit in the group and forgetting about Jianzhu, and then Lek was killed in all of this. So taking revenge using, the Lek's bullet. It belonged to someone who should take a part in bringing you down. So this is when the threat comes out. You came here without a plan. Whereas I'll tell you exactly what I'm going to do if you don't stand up, walk out of here, and follow me home. I'm going to collapse this building and kill everyone in it. That's the trouble with structures made completely of stone. They break instead of flexing, which makes them hardly vulnerable to earthquakes. You be living up to your Dao Fei name, Kyoshi said. And he says, you want to know how I earned that name all those years ago, so we're finally going to get the full truth of the Gravedigger of Zulu Pass name. It's a funny story. First, I made an example out of a few earthbenders among the Yellownecks. I took my time with them. Then I told the rest that whoever dug the deepest trench to hide in by sundown would be spared, free to return to their homes. Only the ones who lagged behind would be killed. He chuckled in satisfaction. You should have seen it. They dug as fast as their wretched hands could take them. Some of them killed each other over a shovel. They jumped into their holes and looked up with a smug little smile, thinking they'd be the ones surviving, not their compatriots. And there you have it, 5,000 fresh graves dug by their own occupants. I simply swept the earth over the top, like I once explained to a former pupil, strength is bending people to your will, not the elements. So, then he says, you're very hard to bend, Kyoshi, but if you give me no other option, after I kill everyone here, I may have to go home and cut Rangi's throat. This is when she fires the bullet at him and the action, as you could say, starts. He blocks this immediately with earthbending, but he is taken by surprise because all he thinks is that Kyoshi can only go big, that she can't do precision bending, and so it was sort of a fitting ploy that she takes him by surprise by using a relatively small stone like bullet, but something that is capable of killing. So she went for the kill here, but he blocks it, and then this is where we have the struggle. Now, this is an interesting one because this is their fight. It is just a struggle between two earthbenders trying to bend the same piece of earth. After this, Jianzhu also tries to break the tea house apart. So they're both struggling over the stone, the Lex bullet, which is like floating in between them. But then Kyoshi is also using some of her bending to counteract Jianzhu's bending to bring the tea house down. And so they're both just locked either side of a table from each other, straining completely, like breaking themselves apart to block the other's bending. And it's one of the first times you really get this sense of just the physical strain of bending, and especially two people's bending trying to like counter each other, not in the sense of like a firebender and like an airbender just kind of firing at each other and what happens, but just one pebble, stone in the middle, two earthbenders trying to fight over control of it. What does that like feel like? It's very interesting to see the kind of physical kind of response in a way, because of course the way bending works is that the chi in someone's body, a bender has control over that, and they can extend it beyond their body to touch their element and then bend it and manipulate it in that way. So there is always like a connection from the person's energy to the element itself. And so of course I suppose to a degree would also work in the other way. If you activate your bending and are controlling a piece of earth, and then someone like grabs that earth and like tries to pull it away or do something like that, of course like that would also kind of backfire on you as well. Like you would feel what's happening there. That's why like when Boomy is lifting up the huge pieces of earth and he's really straining, that's why it is that way. And it's not just a case of any powerful earthbender can just be like one finger like do moving mountains around. No, there is a physical aspect to it, and I think this chapter especially gets that across really, really well. So he noticed her noticing his little moment of weakness. With a surge of anger, he pointed his leg to the side and tried to blow out the supporting wall. Kyoshi made a silent scream as the effort to keep it intact tore a muscle within her body along her rib cage. So they're not even doing any like big movements, but just the strain of activating their bending is like, tearing muscles across their body. I really like that sense of just strain, of just like they're kind of vibrating, and the vibration is beginning to build in the tea house because Kyoshi's blocking Jianzhu from just blowing it out, but that's creating like tension within the walls. The stone is like hovering in between them. It's super, super tense because at any moment the tea house could just collapse, because to everyone else in the tea shop, they're just like either side of a table, just sort of like pointing at each other, and if they don't notice the rock, the stone hovering in between them, they're not obviously clear the two benders are fighting. There's a little bit of shaking going on, but everyone's still in the tea house. They're not evacuating yet, and they're under so much strain that Kyoshi can't even warn them to get out. So if Kyoshi fails, the whole place collapses and pretty much everyone gets killed. If Jianzhu fails, Kyoshi has to devote more of her time to keeping the place up than him, and he could counter back. So it's a really, neutral situation here that you'd even notice that. Note that. Neutral Jing. But then, here's what breaks the deadlock. Big, big, big surprise here. So, a cloaked figure walked with purpose towards their table. Neither she nor Jianzhu could move. It was as if a third presence had joined their struggle, clasping its hands over their interlocked bending, squeezing them together. The person who stood over them with all the familiarity in the world threw back his hood. It was Yoon. This was an incredible reveal when I got to it, because like, I'm not going to say that I had no suspicion that Yoon would come back at some point, because even when I read the book the first time, I didn't really take in all of the details. Just the sheer fact that we didn't see Yoon's body. We didn't really see him actually be killed. We were just sort of told that Father Glowworm was going to take blood, the price in blood and stuff like that, and assumed that he was going to be killed and taken out by the spirit. But we never saw the body, and if you know anything about stories, you know to never really trust, a character being killed unless you really see the body and note that they're fully dead, get that full confirmation. Despite that, after a bunch of chapters passed and there was no real development on the Yoon side of things, I'm like, oh wow, he is really gone. And I didn't expect going into the final fight that they'd choose that moment to basically interrupt, to get in the way of the fight that's been set up from the very beginning of the book, and have Yoon be the one to sort of break that deadlock. It's incredible because it makes complete sense, because there's such a mystery around how he has come back. But we'll discuss Yoon once we get through the chapter. But anyway, here's what he does. So, everyone is shocked. Kyoshi is just, shocked. She says it's a dream and a nightmare. She asks, how had he survived? How had he found them? How had he come back now of all times? Jianzhu nearly loses control of his bending seeing him. And this is where they get across the idea. Kyoshi could no longer tell who was in control of what, with their bending commingled together. Only certain that if she released the tension by moving or speaking or blinking, the whole enterprise would come tumbling down. So now it's a three-way bending sort of struggle. We don't know what Yoon is doing just yet in the bending, but it's just this sense of there's so much like, I have control over this and this, I'm trying to counter you, do this. No one actually knows what like piece of earth they're really in control of. So it's just this like building on top of each other and just the tension rising as like what's actually going to happen. So here's Yoon, and we get a description of him here. Yoon said nothing. He looked at them with a faint, beatific smile. His skin had the glow of a healthy adventurer back from a successful trip, neat stubble lining his jaw. His eyes twinkled with the same warm mischief that Kyoshi remembered so well. None of this kept a blinding, nauseating sense of wrongness from pouring out of his body. People had always been drawn to Yoon like metal to a lodestone, and Kyoshi had been no exception. But he changed. There was something essential missing from the otherworldly being in front of her, something human. The boy she'd loved had been replaced by a hollow scaffolding, wind blowing through its gaps. The nearby customers who'd so far tolerated her strangeness recoiled away from Yoon like he was a rotting corpse, scraping chairs over the floor in their haste to create distance. They couldn't bear to be near him. So, interesting description of him in that like Kyoshi looks at him and sees that he actually looks really healthy, he has stubble like as if he hasn't shaved in a while, okay. But his skin had the glow of a healthy adventurer. His eyes kind of roughly look the same, but like he's giving off this aura in a way, like Kyoshi almost sensing his energy that something is very, very wrong with him. And other people have this sense of like he looks like a corpse, which almost gives you the sense that maybe the people of this place are familiar with him more recently, and they know that like he is someone that they have to get away from, or else it's just that Kyoshi is missing something from the way she kind of looks at him. But just that description of just like scaffolding wind blowing through the gaps, that there's almost like nothing there, something inherent to who he is, something human is missing from him. What's going on? But again, we'll get to speculation on that later. So Yoon noticed the bullet on the table. Its presence filled him with delight, and his face lit up as if he'd seen the object before. So Yoon never met Bullet Lack, of course, so how could he know what this is? That's interesting. He reached over and slowly plucked the stone free while Kyoshi and Jianzhu were still fighting for control over it, tearing the rock from the combined bending grip of a great master and the Earth Avatar. To Kyoshi, it felt like he'd ripped a hole in the empty space, removed the moon from the sky itself. She could almost hear a sucking noise as the bullet left her and Jianzhu's grasp. I love that description of that he just has this like overwhelming sense of power, reaches into this deadlock and just pulls this thing out. And there's so much energy keeping this thing in place that both like Jianzhu and Kyoshi just feel like this vacuum just like kind of suck in as like the thing they were fighting over is pulled out by a so much more powerful force. Still without words, Yoon held the rock out, making sure Kyoshi and Jianzhu could both see it. Then he cupped that hand to Jianzhu's chest. His eyes bulged. Kyoshi felt his earthbending flare outwards as he was forced to compensate. Yun gently put his other hand, still stained with black ink, to Jianzhu's back. After another second passed, he showed them what had travelled between his palms, the stone, now covered in blood. Yun didn't wait for Jianzhu to finish dying. He winked at Kyoshi and then turned to leave. Jianzhu teetered in his seat, gagging on blood, a dark red patch spreading from the tunnel in his chest. The waiter screamed. So Yun just arrives, plucks the stone out from the middle of Kyoshi and Jianzhu fighting, and then just places the stone in front of Jianzhu's chest, other hand behind it. Stone travels from here to here through Jianzhu, creating just a crater-sized hole in his chest. Jianzhu's just dead like that. That's a crazy way to do it. Now, from Yun's perspective, character-wise, this is the person he cared about the most. His, basically, in a way, father figure. Took him off the streets of Makapu, gave him everything, this life, that he was meant to be the Avatar. Then he abandoned him the second that he found out Yun wasn't the Avatar and left him to die. From that perspective, it's like, okay, this is the revenge you would almost expect Yun to have. But for Yun to so cold-bloodedly kill Jianzhu like that, doesn't say a word, doesn't react, there's no real emotion in this. He just takes out Jianzhu, no remorse. That is like the sort of thing, like that was the sort of training Laoji wanted Kyoshi to get towards, to be able to just kill him like that. That's kind of what Laoji was looking for in like an assassin. Kyoshi couldn't do that, but here Yun walks in and does that very thing. So Kyoshi's still struggling, trying to keep Jianzhu's earthbending death throes from taking the place down. Then here's where we get the big moment. Yun paused and looked back at Kyoshi, seeing her duress. How she was barely holding the tea house together. He grinned, and then he bumped the table. The foundations of the building rose and fell on his command. The impact knocked people to the floor. Kyoshi lost her grip on too much of the stone, and the roof began to crumble. Yun vanished. And this is where the whole 3-story building just begins to collapse around them completely. Kyoshi's in a terrible position here. She can't contain all of this. Lots of people are about to be killed right now. And this is where they decide to cut out to just a quick scene here of Laoji explaining to Kyoshi the immortality technique, the technique that she needs to do to increase her lifespan. So, again, Kyoshi didn't want to do it, but he'd made her join him in his daily longevity exercises. This isn't spiritualism. You don't have to believe, you simply have to practice. He'd taken her to the same spots the guru would meditate in, the curves of flowing rivers, the stumps of once massive trees, caves bored into the cliffside. He'd also filled her ear with counterintuitive nonsense. Instead of blocking everything out like you would normally meditate, take it all in. Notice each blade of grass in the same moment you would notice a single one. Divide your body in two, then divide it again and again and again. What would you have left? A bloody mess. Exactly. Put the pieces back and put them back again and again and again. One more time and you're whole once more. And Kyoshi says, a human being isn't a block of stone. That's where you're wrong. The illusion that the self is separate from the rest of the world is the driving factor that limits our potential. Once you realize there's nothing special about the self, it becomes easier to manipulate. So that's an interesting kind of perspective you need to have to kind of do all of this. It's just to sort of realize that, I suppose that you are just a standard part of this world in the same way that so much can be changed and manipulated that, you too can be changed and manipulated, almost like you can bend yourself almost is like the idea here. That if you take yourself apart and put it back together, you counter the effects of aging by doing that, by meditating in like reverse effectively. Don't block everything out. Take everything in at once as a way to do that. That's an interesting perspective. Again, it's still a little bit like mumbly jumbly, like what exactly is this all about? But the I think core idea you sort of get roughly how it works, even if you don't have the full specifics on it. Maybe the second book will delve into like even more details. But anyway, this also seems to have the effect of having effectively thought her in a way, I suppose, a way to become connected to the Avatar state, because she seems to have, through this, why else would they show this in between crazy moment and her using the Avatar state, that this has also had the effect of she's learned effectively, guru-like, how to use the Avatar state. So, To Kyoshi, that had been the easiest lesson to take in. She was nothing special. She'd never been anything special. That was a mantra she believed in. Her eyes glowed, but only in a brief pulse. She didn't need to express her mastery over multiple elements like she had during her duel with Zu. Just one. The stone was her, and she was the stone. That's such an interesting idea that, like, they almost effectively confirmed to us here that when the Avatar uses the Avatar state, just pulsing it on and off, that is just a way for them to connect with one of their 4 elements and use it at like an Avatar state level without fully needing to go into the Avatar state, so you can use all 4 elements at once on that level. I like that as almost like a rule they're putting in place here, that whenever you see an Avatar just pulse, it's just, I want to use one element with the full mastery of the entire Avatar lineage. So very cool. So she goes Earth here because, of course, there's no way she can keep up this whole place. But Avatar state, everything, the ultimate master of earthbending, now she has control to touch every piece of rock that's falling, the entire tea house, keep it all up to let people get out. Then she lets the place collapse. She's about to be arrested also by the police here, but she just does steps away, leaving Jianzhu's body there. It's just noted here, the path that led her to him had simply ended. So very, very interesting. And then we just end on the scene. She returns to her group, the Flying Opera Company. They have Rangi. They also have Heiran as well. And it's very interesting here. Kyoshi, my mother, Rangi whispered. We found her in the infirmary like this. I don't know what happened to her. I abandoned my mother. I left her and this happened. Kyoshi tries to kind of calm her down. We'll do whatever it takes to fix her. And then she notes, her hair. I should be wearing a sack over my head so you can't see me like this. And they just kind of have a quick kind of embrace moment here, just to calm Rangi down. Then they ask, okay, did you finish the job? Like, we got our job done. We also took some of Jianzhu's stuff on the way out, so like we actually got a score out of this. So Kirima and Wong are kind of set for the next while, and they got Rangi out as well. So Heiran is still obviously in a coma here, but now Rangi has her back now. They're in charge of having to heal her. They don't know what exactly she's been hit with or anything like that, just that she needs to be healed. Then they ask, did you kill him? Yes, she has to confirm that. And here we get it, right here. And despite her best efforts to sully her position, her dedication to committing every single possible outrage and act of disqualification, she was still the Avatar. Was it over? Kyoshi found she had no answer to that question at all. So yeah, that's the end of this chapter here. And yeah, there's a lot to discuss here. I suppose mainly, what are my thoughts on how they did this final fight? I don't mind that it wasn't a big, like, crazy, boxing match of a bending fight where they just went at each other. That this wasn't like Korra Tarlok kind of 2.0, but, obviously with Kyoshi and Jianzhu. I actually like that it was just this struggle of her protecting the people in that tea shop and trying to get the information about where Rangi is, and him just having lost in all of this, just willing to kill anyone to get Kyoshi back on his side, despite everything he does furthering the distance between himself and Kyoshi. That's how set he is on, I have to be the one to get the Avatar and control what the Avatar does to help the world, that he doesn't realize that he's lost himself in this. And just the fact that it is this struggle, the master earthbender versus the bender he looks down on. He never thought much of Kyoshi's bending skills, but he hasn't accounted for the fact that she's learned along the way. She has people to support her and is now a challenge for him. And then adding on to that, the fact that Yoon returns, and the person he borderline betrayed the most in all of this came back and just killed him like that is brutal, but it's also very fitting that Jianzhu goes out like that in a similar way almost to just like deadly bending, to the same way he took out Kelsang. That's how Yoon takes out Jianzhu. That Kyoshi doesn't have to kill Jianzhu either. Someone else did it for her. And it was someone who in the same position. Like, Kyoshi's rage towards Jianzhu comes from the exact same situation that Yoon's comes from. So revenge is taken for both of them. It's just Kyoshi didn't actually have to do it. So I thought that was pretty interesting in all of this. And then, yes, as for Yoon, I like the way that this was done. Like I said, I think you go back to this scene where Yoon was actually quote unquote killed. Let me see, can I find it quickly here? Might have to do a cut here if it takes a little bit too long. Yeah. So yeah, you go back to the chapter and you realize the specifics of this moment. There is more of a story to what happens when Yoon was quote unquote killed or taken. Kyoshi and Yoon were looking at each other in the eye when it happened, when she saw Yoon's spirit break inside him. He had been lying to her with his body and his smile and his worlds this entire time. He thought it was him, truly and utterly. He'd never once entertained the notion that it might not be him. Any kindness and warmth he'd shown to Kyoshi since the iceberg hadn't been signs of his acceptance. They'd been layers of armor that he'd furiously assembled to protect himself, and that armor had failed. Piece by piece, Kyoshi saw the only Yoon she'd ever known, the boy who was the Avatar, slough and flake into nothingness. His mantle had been stripped from his shoulders, and the shape underneath was merely wind. He let go of her. So Yoon let go of Kyoshi. He specifically chose not to be saved by Kyoshi because she was holding on to him as he was being dragged away by Father Glowworm. And Yoon let go of Kyoshi. He accepts what's about to happen to them, and that's when Jianzhu comes in and seals the mountain, basically. So we never actually see the result of what happens here. And then you have the fact that from Kyoshi's perspective, she saw an immediate change in Yoon the second it was revealed that Kyoshi was the Avatar by the spirit. So it asks you to think about this in a bunch of different ways. What's happened to Yoon here? He's clearly changed. The biggest example of this is not just the description that people thought of him like a rotting corpse or anything like that. It's the fact that he bumps the tea shop and allows the place to collapse. That this person who wanted to be the Avatar of Avatars, was set up to be the next Yang Chen, basically, is now the person purposefully, seemingly just to make mischief, seeing Kyoshi struggling and keeping the place up, just bumps the place just to see what happens. The guy who before, would do anything to defend his friends is now the one killing Jianzhu like with a really brutal attack. How did he become like this? Is it just a case of his spirit being broken after having so much hope about being the Avatar? Now he's not the Avatar. Or, given that he was taken by a spirit, has he been like spirit morphed in the same way that Tokuga or Yao from Beginnings was morphed? In that would explain why he suddenly has such a sort of power boost to be able to just rip a stone out from two benders. Now, power level wise, we know they were both suffering from poison, so maybe their levels weren't as high. Maybe that him taking it out is just him being 100% fit versus them not being that way. But it is a thing that would explain the sort of otherworldly presence that he has, that he has that sort of spirit element in all of him, and that this spirit was sort of described as being like a kind of an eye of like light and stuff like that, almost like made of goo or something like that. So if this spirit has spirit morphed him but maybe chosen not to give him any of the appearance of the spirit, he might give off the aura effectively of someone different but have the power boost of someone who was spirit morphed, like Tokuga was so powerful at the end of Turf Wars. So yeah, there's two ways they can go about it, because Yoon was presented to us as being a sort of powerful earthbender, sort of in a way sort of the next Jianzhu, in that like he was that good at earthbending. So he could just be that good at earthbending, but we don't really know for sure. Either way, as far as Kyoshi could tell, the first look at him, he looked whole and healthy, and it was only looking at like him beyond just outward appearances, she could tell that there was something deeply wrong with him, that there was just wind flowing through gaps where otherwise there was a whole person there. That's very interesting. So yeah, the speculation about Yoon is definitely going to go on a long while. Again, I'm planning to do some sort of a video at the end of all of this to talk about maybe what's next for Shadows of Kyoshi and stuff like that, so I don't want to spend too long here just speculating on Yoon. But yeah, that's been my thoughts on the return. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on this, how the final fight went, your thoughts on the return of Yoon. all that sort of stuff. What are your thoughts? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.